We'll just give it just a few more minutes before we get started. I know there'll be a couple more people that jump on before we start into what I have today. But before that, if anyone has any questions or anything they want answered, speak up. Got a few minutes here. We can answer a few things.
I have no questions, but it doesn't mean that I don't know it all.
No, that's fine. In fact, we had somebody the other day say, well, we have lots of questions, but I don't know when to ask it. And we said, well, come on the compliance call and just ask the questions. That's everybody learns from them. So in fact, that's why this call is here, is so that we can answer you guys' questions in real time. And you can also just call too. So, all right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the due diligence deadline and what to do and how to handle it. We're going to go through the resolution of due diligence addendum, and then also going to touch on the contingent cancellation. So we get a lot of questions that come up about, I've got an inspection that's done and I want to ask for some repairs, or how are we navigating the due diligence deadline? And so I want to kind of touch on that because we're putting things to the very last minute, or we're kind of overlooking the due diligence. The due diligence is a great opportunity for us to help our clients understand, feel comfortable, and move forward. And if we wait until the very last minute to do our due diligence activities, then we can run into a big problem with that. So when you set your due diligence deadline, when you put it into the contract, you want to give yourself enough time that your client can get their everything that they feel is necessary to move forward with the contract. So yes, it includes inspections. Yes, it includes researching different projects or whatever they're trying to do, driving around the neighborhood, knocking on the doors, attending something in the neighborhood, or whatever they want to do. That's part of the due diligence period. So if you have a client that wants to do lots of inspections, lots of concern, you might want to put that deadline out a little bit further. I think a typical due diligence deadline, anywhere between 10 and 14 days, is sufficient to get the job done. If they're available and you can get out and get an inspector in there, you might be able to shorten that time period. But just keep in mind that you want to make sure you know what they're wanting to do. It's not a bad practice to talk to your client prior to putting in an offer about what kind of inspections they want done. Because if you have a client that wants to do a normal inspection, they want to do a radon test, and they want to do a meth test, you're not going to be able to get that done one day before your due diligence deadline. Meth test or your radon test alone is going to take 3 days for you to get results back. So if you're set your due diligence for, say, 5 days from now, and your inspection goes in on Monday, you're not going to get your results for your radon until after that deadline's done, and you're going to be scrambling to get an extension on your deadlines. The other thing I want you to keep in mind when we're talking about due diligence is the due diligence period is the opportunity to get things done. So if I have, let's say I have 14 days of due diligence, and in those 14 days, I'd go ahead and I get my inspection done right away, which I would suggest you do. You get your inspection done on day 2 of going under contract, and you get these repairs to be done. You still have 12 more days before your due diligence is done. At that point, you can actually send over an email with the repairs your client wants over to the other agent. You don't need to put them in the contract yet. You don't have to put them in the contract because you're now just kind of discussing what's going to be happening. You see agents all the time that they put their whole laundry list of repairs in an addendum, and then the seller comes back and does another addendum, and then another addendum, and another addendum, and now we're 6 addendums into this due diligence, when really it's a matter of having a conversation. about what needs to be done. The other thing is if the seller does the repairs within the time of the due diligence, then there really is no need to put it in the contract because it's already completed. So if you've given yourself enough time in your due diligence to go back in and inspect what's been done, and your client says, yep, I'm fine with that work, I'm fine with what's been done, it never actually has to enter into the contract. It only goes in the contract if they haven't repaired it before the due diligence deadline, and you want to make sure that it's done and you're protecting your client before you actually close on the home. So a lot of times the confusion is, oh, I've got to hurry and put it in the contract just so that we're protected. Well, the due diligence is protecting you. So if you can have those items fixed, especially if they're minor items, you can have those fixed before your due diligence deadline, then have your client take a look at them, sign off on them, be okay with them. There's no need to even put it into the contract. So the only reason we don't necessarily always want to put it in the contract is, you know, if the lender's going to have a problem with it, or if there's any issues with the lending side of it. But you can always put it in the contract, but the whole purpose of the due diligence deadline is to get things done in that process, in that time period. Now, let's say that we either don't get the inspection done, we have a short due diligence deadline, and we want to make sure that it's in the contract. So I'm going to share with you the resolution of due diligence. Now, you can do this on a normal addendum, but I'm not sure why we would skip using addendum that is designed for this very purpose. They've created this addendum. All right, Russ, can you see it?
Okay, can I ask a clarification really quickly?
Yeah.
You said that we can ask for things and it doesn't necessarily even have to go, if it's agreed upon, into the on the rep C. So would you suggest still those types of things be finished before the due diligence period, or as long as they're agreed upon in an email, then that would be okay? Unless it's something that would the lender would say, no, that has to be in there because we need it, you know, like it's a hole in the roof or something. I don't know.
Sure. No, that's a great question. So let me just clarify that real quick. You are not using an email as a commitment from either party to do it. You're not using it as a contract. So if you just leave it in the email and it's not going to be done before the due diligence deadline, then you need to put it in the contract. If you're passing the due diligence deadline, you need to put it in the contract because that email is not enforceable. Now, I've had agents send over an email and say, I just need your client to agree to this and sign it. That's called a double contract. So now I'm doing a contract outside of my real estate contract to do these repairs, and you can't do that. So the only way you don't put it in the rep C is if you're going to complete that repair before your due diligence deadline. If for some reason it's not going to be completed, you need to put it in the contract unless your client is okay with just trusting that they're going to get it done. Because the reality, let's say that they say they're going to fix, let's see, there's a leaky faucet in the bathroom, okay? And you put it in an email and the seller says, oh, I wasn't able to get the plumber out this week. I can get him out next week. And it's past your due diligence deadline. And you say, okay, that's fine. I'll trust it. I'm not going to put it in the contract. And then next week, the plumber comes back and says, well, actually, it's not a leaky faucet. It's actually a really expensive fix. So it's going to cost you a lot more money. And the seller says, oh, no, I didn't agree to do that. I'm not going to do that. You as a buyer's agent would not be able to go back to them and say, hey, you told me you were going to do this, because it's not, there's no agreement to it. You got to protect your client. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. So the only way you don't put in the contract is if it's completed before due diligence deadline. Otherwise, we're going to go into this resolution of due diligence addendum. Okay, so it's just a normal addendum we're going to put into our contract. Section 1, the first section, seller and buyer agree to the following, and it says check applicable boxes, which means you can check more than one. It doesn't have to be, I'm just doing number 1, I'm just doing number 2, I'm just doing number 3. There can be a combination of all 3 of these if your client so chooses. Okay, the first one is closing costs. Seller and buyer agree that the buyer accepts property. They'll contribute this amount of money to be applied towards closing costs, permanent reduction, all of this. It's basically our closing cost addendum. This is the big key here, and this is where some confusion happens, is right here it says, if in a prior addendum to the REPC, seller has agreed to pay an amount towards buyer's closing costs, the prior contribution, the amount shown in section 1 above shall be in addition to prior contribution. So let's say that you write an offer and you've already asked for $8,000 in closing costs. So you have the closing cost addendum, it's in your contract. Now I'm going to do some repairs and I find out that I need more closing costs. I need another $5,000 in closing costs. I'm not going to come in here and write, I need $13,000 in closing costs because I want to make sure I'm covering that. I'm going to write $5,000 in closing costs. And then this addendum will be in addition to any prior an amount. So I don't need to, because it has this wording, you don't need to add them together. Now, if you choose not to use this addendum and you're using just a regular addendum and you don't have this verbiage in there and you say closing costs to be $5,000, you just changed yours from $8,000 now to $5,000. So it's important to use this kind of verbiage if you're going to, if you have 2 different closing costs in there. So this would just be the amount you're adding for your due diligence section, and it doesn't supersede the amount. The one that I see on there is like the FHA addendum that has the closing costs there. This doesn't supersede that. This is an addition to that. Whereas if you don't use this addendum, you could actually eliminate that. Hopefully that's not confusing. Okay, so closing costs, that's basically saying we're going to take care of all of these repairs on our own. You give us some closing costs to take care of it. Basically, in a nutshell, what it is saying you as a buyer, instead of bringing your own cash to close, use your cash to fix this, and I'll pay for your closing costs. This is the best way for the buyer to have the money to do their repairs because they won't have to bring that money to the closing table. Now, that might not help them if you've already asked for $8,000 closing costs. They don't have any more money to fix things. And so you add it to here, they're still not bringing more money into closing. That could be a problem. And you'd also want to check with your lender, because if you go over the closing cost allotment, then that could cause a problem too. So you just have to reduce your purchase price, which ultimately doesn't put cash in your client's pocket to fix things. So that may or may not be a good option for you. Second one here is purchase price reduction. Seller and buyer agree that buyer accepts the property as provided in section 10.2 and 10.3 and the REPC, and the purchase price shall be reduced to the new purchase price. So now let's say that I want closing costs, but I'm over my limit on closing costs for my loan. So I might need to do a reduction in my purchase price. So I might bring the purchase price down as well. So I can do that, or I can just do that straight out of the gates. And then the last one here, repairs to be made by the seller. This area right here in the middle is fillable on the MLS. So you can go in and write your repairs right here. So these are the repairs that they're going to be made during this period. So you can do any of the 3. So 1, 2, or 3, any of those 3, you can do a combination of them. You can just do one of them. But that's your options for your due diligence. Now, the question comes up, what happens if they don't do the repairs? This section right here, 3.1, buyer's remedies for unfinished repairs. This is another reason why I would suggest using this addendum and not just doing your own addendum to do your repairs, because it has verbiage in it that protects your client, where if you just did a normal addendum, it's just going to say seller to fix this, seller to fix this, where this gives you some remedies. So buyer's remedies for unfinished repairs. So if we get to settlement and those repairs are not done, this is what's going to happen. Now, if I don't check one of these boxes, then my only remedy is to escrow money in for repairs. That's my only remedy. But I would suggest we check an applicable box, okay? And it's not both of them, it's one or the other. A, buyer may cancel the REPC in addition to returning earnest money deposits or deposit if applicable, except from the seller as liquidated damage, the sum equal to the earnest money deposit. So you're saying that we've already passed all of our deadlines. I don't have a due diligence deadline. I don't have a financing deadline. I don't have appraisal deadline. We're going to settlement. And I look and find out that the repairs they agreed to are not done. If I check box A, this allows me to cancel the contract on the day of settlement, and my buyer is going to get their earnest money back, and they're going to get their earnest money back, and you're going to get that same amount in liquidated damages from the seller. So that's one option there. Option number 2B, buyer may complete the purchase of the property and pursue any remedies available under law. These terms, section 3, shall survive closing. So basically, this is saying this repair is important, but I really still want to buy the property. So I'm going to buy the property, then I'm going to go after the seller to make sure they get this done because they agreed to doing it. When they agree in a contract that they want to have certain repairs done, then they have to do those repairs. It's not a matter of, oh, I just decided I didn't want to do that, or I found out what the cost was and I decided I'm not going to do that. That's not, they cannot just one-sided say I'm not going to do the repairs if they agree to it in the contract, which is one of the reasons why it's really important to be very specific on what you're wanting them to do. Because I guarantee you, your buyers, so let's say, give you an example. There's a hole in the wall. Okay, your buyer says, I want them to fix the hole in the wall. So you put in the contract, buyer or seller to fix hole in the wall. Okay, you show up at settlement and you look at the hole in the wall and it's got a board put on the wall. It's not painted. It's not sheetrocked. It's nothing, but the hole is fixed. I guarantee you your buyer is going to say, well, that's not what I meant. And the seller is going to say, you said fix the hole. So I fixed the hole. So you don't want to be super vague on what you're asking. You want to make sure that they know exactly what they're getting. So these two options really come down to, if your client looks at it and says, if these repairs are not done, I absolutely do not want to buy this home, then you need to check box A. If your buyer says, yeah, these need to be done, but if for some reason they're not done, I still want to buy the home, but I'm going to go after them afterwards, then you're going to do section B. Okay. So those are your two options for remedies. Don't just skip those, because if you skip checking one of the boxes, your only remedy is escrowing the money, which really might be your solution anyway, but that's your only choice if you don't check the box. Section 4, due diligence condition. Okay, this is one we get a lot of questions on. It says, upon accepting this addendum, buyer's objections to the buyer or due diligence shall be deemed resolved, and the due diligence condition is waived by the buyer unless checked below. So let's say that I have a 14-day due diligence period. And in those 14 days, I do my inspection on the first 5 days. I do this resolution of due diligence on those 5 days. And then I don't check this box here. That means that my due diligence deadline now just shifted from where it was at to where I am now. I'm saying I'm resolved, everything's done. Now, if I don't want that to happen, I need to check this box right here. And that means my original date stays intact. And even though we've solved the solution, I still have another 5, 6, or whatever, how many days you need, that if something else came up, you can readdress, you can cancel based on due diligence, all of that. So in my opinion, unless you're like really close to your deadline, or if you're completely confident that nothing else is coming up, you probably were going to check that box just to make sure you still have due diligence. Now, if your due diligence is tomorrow, and if they solve this problem, so like, for example, let's say come up here and they reduce your purchase price and they give you closing costs, and that's going to suffice for your buyer, and they're not really looking at anything, you might want to just waive the rest of the due diligence and move forward. But you have to check that box if you're going to keep your due diligence intact. Otherwise, it's automatically gone once they sign this addendum. So any questions on the resolution of due diligence addendum? Okay, so I'm going to jump into one last thing. Let's say that I am to the very end. Let's say my due diligence deadline is today, and we haven't really come up with a solution yet. And I don't want to lose my earnest money. My buyer is still kind of on the fence on whether they still want to buy it or not, but I don't want to lose the earnest money. I'm trying to protect my client. If that's the case, then here is an option you can use. Okay, it's called the contingent cancellation addendum. This goes into the contract as well. This one is basically designed to give you more time to make a decision. It's not designed to get them forced to accept your due diligence items, fix any of those. It's really designed to push forward some deadlines so you protect your client. So if you come in here, normal addendum at the very start, but number one, extension of deadlines. Seller and buyer hereby agree to the following checked applicable boxes. When it's check applicable boxes, it means you can check both of the boxes. You don't have to choose one of them. You can choose both of them. It's not or. You may only want to change one of them. The due diligence deadline extended to this date, or the finance and appraisal extended to this date. This doesn't always have to be used just with your due diligence deadline. If for some reason you're getting close to your appraisal deadline and the appraisal is not back and you need to extend it and you're right on that day, you might want to just extend the one deadline, or you can extend both deadlines if everything gets pushed out a little ways. Okay. Now, this is the key here is I want them to extend this deadline. I'm going to put it out far enough that I can resolve any issues that I'm in the process of. We had one last week where they did their due diligence today, or their inspection was today, and their due diligence deadline was tomorrow, but the buyer at the last minute wanted to do a radon test. Well, when is that radon test going to come back? Well, it's going to come back 3 days after their inspection, which is going to be after their due diligence deadline. So they needed to come in and either cancel the contract or push that deadline to protect them from their due diligence. So this is the notice of cancellation. If for any reason seller does not accept the terms of this addendum in its entirety by the applicable deadline provided below, this addendum shall act as buyer's written notice of cancellation of the REPSI pursuant to, and then check applicable boxes. Okay, so this is, in order for you to cancel a contract, you need to get written notice of cancellation. You cannot call them up and say, hey, we're canceling this contract, just so you know it's canceled, we're out. You actually have to have written notice. So written notice can be in an email, it can be in a cancellation addendum, and it can be in this contingent cancellation. So basically you're saying, if you do not accept this, okay, the seller does not accept the terms of this addendum in its entirety, okay, that means everything part of this addendum. And I'll explain why that's important here in a second as we go through this, because there was some confusion on this that I want to make sure we're cleared up on. So when you come in here, you're going to check what box you're canceling on. If you are past your due diligence deadline, you do not want to cancel based on your due diligence. You don't want to check that box. Messing up after your due diligence, if you check that box and you cancel, even if it's a mistake, you cancel based on due diligence, which means you could lose your client's earnest money just by checking the wrong box. So be conscious of what you're canceling based off of. If I'm canceling based on financing, great. check the financing box. Remember, if you're canceling based on financing, section 8.3BI applies. So if you put any money in that section there and you cancel based on financing, just realize that portion of the earnest money is going to go to the seller. So if you put any money in there and you're doing a contingent cancellation, realize you will lose that money if you're canceling based on financing and there's money in that section. Okay, deadline to accept this addendum. Seller shall have until the last mutually accepted due diligence prior to this addendum. So they have up until that deadline, 5 p.m. So basically it's like, I'm going to cancel right at the deadline. So you're protecting your client. And it gives them up until that deadline to accept this addendum. And then the last financing appraisal addendum. So either one, that gets you right up until that deadline for them to accept it. And then it will be canceled based off of that deadline. Let's see. So unless this is accepted, the REPSI shall be deemed canceled as provided in section 2, whereby earnest money shall be released to the buyer without written requirement of further written authorization from the seller. So as soon as it's canceled, as soon as they don't accept this, then it will, at that point, the REPSI is canceled. Now, if you'll notice, in every one of our addendums and our things, there is 3 choices here: accept, reject, and counter. On this addendum, there is no counter option. You cannot counter this addendum, because if you counter this addendum, that's not you accepting it, then the REPSI would be canceled. So you only have, your client only has 2 choices here. They either accept it or they reject it. They reject it, the contract's canceled based on whichever box you checked. If you accept it, then those dates change and you move forward. Any questions on this addendum? Okay, so that's really in a nutshell what canceling based on inspections and doing your inspections and how you should handle those. The biggest thing is don't leave yourself to the last minute. In fact, Russ had one yesterday or the other day that was called at, was it 4:45 on a due diligence deadline at 5 o'clock, wondering what to do. Well, it puts your client in big risk to wait to the very last minute. These deadlines are established when you go under contract. You need to put them on your calendar. You need to put a reminder in there that you are handling this well before the due diligence deadline. There should be no reason that an addendum needs to be made at 4:45 on the day of due diligence, because of if you're getting close to your deadline, you can do this contingent cancellation or you can do the resolution. So take advantage of that. Okay, hopefully that helps. If there's any other questions.
One other thing, Jason, that I would say, just kind of as a good reminder to let your clients know about that deadline. And regardless, I think it's good a day or two before of just letting them know, hey, our due diligence deadline is on Friday or whenever it is, and explaining, making sure that they understand once we get past that deadline, half of your earnest money's at risk or whatever. I mean, whatever the truth is, like on the one that Jason was talking about in section 8.3BI, the agent had put the full earnest money. So really, once they got past their due diligence, it meant their earnest money is gone if they cancel based on not getting the financing or anything. So I just think it's a good idea as you come up on those dates of making sure your clients know, hey, our due diligence deadline is on this date. If there's anything, and we have till 5 o'clock, at 5 o'clock and 1 second later, we've missed it. So anyway.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, you guys have a great weekend. If you have any other questions, give us a call. We're here to help anytime you need it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. Thank you.